Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Evelyn has been refusing to feed her husband dinner for a whole week now until you stop doing your nonsense without counting on me to at least cook eggs for you. She retorted in response to his surprised look. I'm sick of you working at a loss. And the family suffers. The husband calmly poured himself a cup of tea and sliced the sandwiches. Evelyn was right about some things, and he had to admit it, whether he liked it or not. Demand for fresh flowers had been dropping for several years in a row now. Competition, and if you add to it, rapidly spreading out of themselves fashion, giving instead of bouquets flowers in pots, and there was a whole series of alternatives: bouquet of sweets, of soft toys, of fruit. And it was all so beautifully, interestingly packaged. And it certainly had some sort of material benefit. Yes, that was the whole point. Practicality superseded aesthetics. Of course, most people chose to give as a gift something more useful than cut, albeit very beautiful bouquets, which, no matter how they are not taken care of, will fly into the trash in a couple of weeks, at best in a couple of weeks. Usually much earlier. In the 90s, people had an even harder time. My husband said confidently and set aside his cup of tea. We'll just have to think hard about how to get out of this predicament. But I think we can do it. It can't be that there's no way out at all. Evelyn only curled her lips into a contemptuous sneer and a face 90 didn't remember because she was a child. And also because her daddy had been kicked out of the militia a couple years before his daughter was born. He decided that shuttles are quite possible to make money. And it must be said that he was not so much wrong. Labor was, of course, hard and sometimes dangerous, but it paid for it. One day he was lucky. Returning from Poland, my father saw a burnt-out warehouse where his colleagues left the purchased goods quite a bit, very conditionally, in looting, and the man got rich. He returned home with a huge shipment of all kinds of junk that cost him nothing. He quickly sold it all, and grabbing his wife in one hand and a bag full of money in the other, he rushed to the train station and took the first direction he could find. Soon Evelyn was born, and by then her daddy had become a hotel owner. Of course, a two-story cottage on the shore was hard to consider a full-fledged hotel, but it brought some money. By Evelyn's 10th birthday, her father had 4 such cottages, and they all prospered. So Evelyn, listening to the conversations of adults, living people that in the 90s was difficult to live, only shrugged their shoulders, who lived hard. Her family was doing just fine. And if the lazy and wimpy pants from her family and still get a paycheck could not adjust, it was certainly the merit and problem of those who were too stupid or lazy to work. These were difficulties to which the lazy had condemned themselves, but that her husband was suddenly talking about it. No, there was no way she had expected that already. The light played merrily on the narrow blade, and James turned it this way and that, as if he were throwing sun bunnies. He had the most innocent look about him. But somehow Evelyn knew he was faking it. The whole wall behind him was stained red. And it wasn't paint. It wasn't paint. It was, "James, what are you doing? Stop it." Evelyn begged, looking at her lover with the knife in her hand. "Are you out of your mind? Golden, because the blood's going to get all over the floor. We'll never get it cleaned up. We'll be traced." James gave a slow, lazy grin, and Evelyn, as unafraid as she was, felt her heart sink sweetly again at the sight of that smile. How she loved him. Those sensual lips, those sparkles in the depths of his eyes. "James, my darling, don't you see?" He asked that. "You shouldn't. It's been flooded all around here for a long time. Look down." Evelyn reluctantly tore her gaze away from her favorite face and looked down at her feet. James shrieked in horror. Now she saw that James was right, and she hadn't noticed anything. There was blood all over the floor, and more of it. Where was it coming from? Blood poured down her legs all the way to her ankles. "James, help." She looked around, trying to find a chair, a windowsill, something to climb on, but there was nothing around. Just bare walls reinforced with scarlet spray. I got to get out of here. Can't you see anything? Help me, do something. Better not move, James advised with a laugh. He didn't seem embarrassed by anything. He even found it funny, or you will, and then you'd be a goner. Evelyn could actually feel the warm liquid realizing her ankles. With each movement, it became as if it was getting thicker. It was getting harder to move around in it, like she was trying to walk through the pulling honey. This all needs to be removed immediately, she whispered confusedly. Otherwise, we'll succumb. If we don't drown here. It was only now that she noticed that the blood level was slowly beginning to rise higher. The water is coming in quietly, James noticed. Maybe we should have gotten out of here early. Wait, stay still, or you won't get out at all. But it wasn't the water that whispered. Evelyn, watching in horror as the red liquid crept up to her knee. It's not water, James, it's blood. He didn't answer her. And Evelyn suddenly realized that she was alone in this room. James had disappeared. He'd somehow managed to get out. She was left alone in here. James. She screamed and scrambled to her feet again. James. Moving became even harder. The spilled blood was holding her tight. Jane shouted desperately for the third time, and she couldn't stand on her feet, fell straight into the dark red slurry. Evelyn, wake up. Why did you open up like that? Evelyn heard and opened her eyes. Her husband's face was bent over her in the nightlight. It was troubled and almost frightened. It's a dream. You're having a nightmare. Her throat was dry. The voice sounded like someone else's me. Me what? You were thrashing, screaming, calling for some James, said the husband, helping his wife to sit up on the bed. Her heart was still beating hard. I had a nightmare. I was drowning in blood. I don't know what it was, James. Oh, how horrible. It's a good thing it was just a bad dream. She wiped the sweat from her forehead with the edge of the blanket. It appeared that she was covered in sweat. Her hair was damp, and her palms were damp too, as if she'd held them under a stream of cold water. Probably watching your horror movies again, Andrew said, getting up. I warned you about dreaming later, didn't I? It's cold, Evelyn complained. Lie down. He covered her with his blanket and kissed her cheek. I have to go to work. There's a new shipment today. I have to drive to the point, take it in, and you try to go back to sleep. But no nightmares this time. You got a deal. I'll try, she smiled, closing her eyes. And Andrew left the bedroom. Evelyn immediately threw back the blanket and sat up again. Her feet were icy cold, and she rubbed them vigorously. She'd seen too many horror movies. What kind of idiots are these? She'd chosen her husband. Does she need to watch horror movies? Aren't there enough of them around her every day? It was only 5 o'clock. Andrew rushes to the wholesale outlet to get his flowers, which no one buys anyway. Why does he take so many? Evelyn knew the plight. It's not like he needs the business. No one needs flowers anymore. At first, she tried to help him. Maybe lower the prices a little, she suggested. But Andrew only shook his head impossibly. I'm investing in the product after all. Then don't forget that I have to pay the utilities in the stores, then the salaries of the salesmen, and I have to earn something myself. Well, what if you close the outlets, leave one and go online like a lot of people do? No, you can't. There are people who don't want to order a cat in a bag. They want to see the flowers themselves. Choose the right ones for the bouquet, you know. I have to change the whole concept of the business. But right now, there's no profit in your business. It's a loss-making business. And you want to keep the concept. It worked before. It will work now, I'm sure, answered the husband. It's just not the best of times. That's all. But they'll pass. These bad times have been dragging on for a suspiciously long time. Evelyn thought grimly for over a year now. And now it was summer, the dead season for the flower business. The sales just aren't there. And after all, if you give yourself the trouble to think about it, it is very understandable who wants to pay for flowers. If everyone has at least a vegetable garden or a vacuum cleaner alone smoke, Andrew can wait forever for customers and ignore a simple thing. His business is agonizing, and he just watches and thinks that somehow everything will work itself out. You still can't forget that 10 to 15 years ago, you were making good money, she repeated. But times have changed. The very tradition of giving flowers for every occasion is a thing of the past. And you yourself know why this happened. Your flowers are to blame. You're the ones who jacked up the prices. It used to be that any poor student could get a bouquet for his girl from his scholarship. Now you charge as much for bouquets as a full gift. Andrew listened to his wife, skeptically, raising his eyebrows. Babe, the tradition of giving flowers can't go away. It's been around forever. They may not be given as often now, but March 8 and September 1 were mercilessly reprised by Evelyn. March 8 and September 1. Those are the 2 days of the year when a small flower store earns something, and the rest of the time you're barely scraping by to make ends meet. And summer is a disaster for you. Well, please, listen to me. Let's find some solution, for instance. But what do you think about the flower business? You don't know what it is, but I have a brain. And unlike you, I don't hang on to unprofitable projects. Good start. Andrew, you're angry. Tell me what you think. I'll explain to you why they're bad. She suggested to her husband that he cut back on purchases. But even here, Andrew was relentless. Customers, buyers are impressionable and vulnerable. They are frightened by half-empty shop windows. He explained, people need abundance. It gives them the misleading impression of prosperity. If they see a half-empty refrigerator, they immediately begin to think that the store is bad. The assortment is zero. There's no selection. And there's a better store around the corner. You can offer them at least some discounts. They will still decide that the whole point is that the flowers are stale. That's why we're trying to get rid of them as fast as we can. He had an answer for everything. Andrew could consider himself the smartest strategist, or even a genius. But there were hardly any customers at his outlets, and those that were came by their long-standing habit in the back of their minds. Evelyn assumed that it was also because they were trying to help Andrei through the hard times. And that's why from time to time they would drop in and buy some nonsense like inexpensive cult chrysanthemums. But the sellers here changed at the speed of light, because no one wanted to sit on a meager salary. And as for the percentage of sales, first these sales should be, and they are not. That is, almost none. But almost, as we know, doesn't count. Andrew tried hiring both female students and retired women, but the result was the same, keeping 6, at best a couple of weeks. A new employee asked her to calculate. I understand them, Andrew admitted. It only seems that there is no such thing as a small salary. But in fact it does, and no one wants to sell their time so cheaply, even just to sit and do nothing for that salary. It's hard to increase wages like that, Evelyn said. I can't, but at least I give them fair warning that the money isn't here. The worst part was that lately Andrew had started talking about tightening their belts. They'd already sold the cars, gotten another used one, but it was good enough. But not new and nowhere near as nice as the one they'd had before. And Andrew had found nothing better to do than to put the difference in his vacationers, to get up to speed. The money back, of course, could not be repaid. To be exact, maybe, but not before 6 months or even more. Evelyn was tearing and metal with rage, but there was nothing she could do. It was his car and his money, and all her attempts at objection crumbled. Oh, simple question. Have I given you less money than before? If not, what are you unhappy about? I'm not happy that because of your flower shop, I have to drive around in some horrible living bucket. I'm not happy that to support your project, you're already pulling from your family. From my point of view, these things should not and must not overlap at all. Andrew sadly admitted, but now I just don't have any other options, and I'll try not to do it again. But then it was time to move on to the country house. This house Evelyn loved with all her soul. It was built according to her project. She herself dealt with designers, went to choose with them absolutely everything from ceramic tiles, toilets in the toilet to hangings in the hallway, from the model of chandelier in the living room to the color of kitchen towels and materials of curtains in the bedroom. And now Andrew is determined to sell this home that she has put her whole soul into. And one can have no doubt that he will, of course, lay out the money again in his flower shop, which it is high time to close and forget about like a terrible dream. "No," she screamed. "No, you will not sell this house. Not as long as I'm alive. And I don't care. Even if your stupid brooms, no one else in this town will buy it. But I'm not giving up the house. But it costs us so much." Embarrassed, explained the husband. "Do you realize it yourself? Yes, we go there a couple times every 6 months. For such a rare vacation in nature, you can rent a recreation center with separate houses. A house is just a vacuum cleaner for money. There, and the constant repair and utilities and flood, it will also come out in a penny. And then it's so big, and it's just the two of us. We could cut back pretty good with the money we save. We have friends coming over and your parents. Evelyn, you can't be serious. To maintain this huge thing for them. Yeah, they don't care if we have a palace or a barn. It's just convenient that it's 20 minutes from town on a good road. That's all. And they don't even notice the area and the interior decoration. Put a big tent for them in our yard, and they will be happy no less, maybe even more. Because romance and this ecotourism. But I notice everything, and I would never dream of being happy about tents. It's a home nest, and I love it," Evelyn said stubbornly. "I don't care. I may be there twice a year, but I know that it's my own home, and I can do whatever I want to do there." And her husband came up with another equally brilliant solution. He decided that if Evelyn was so reluctant to part with the country house, then they needed a more modest city apartment. "We have 4 rooms, he pointed to his wife. 4, and there's only 2 of us. And look, most of the time we only use the living room, and the bedroom, of course. And the other 2 rooms, you could say, idle. So why do we need a table and a place for 2? His wife had already guessed where he was going with this pointless discussion. Asked directly, "And why do you need more money?" "We'll sell this apartment now, then we'll buy an apartment. It's a very good option for us. We can even look for somewhere closer to nature, as you always wanted. That is, on the outskirts of the city, where we will always have a wonderful company in the form of the local Beaumont, like all sorts of Alkis, cab drivers, Comanches, and other orcs. And of course, the restless with infractions, who would always be there to grind our bones. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. A happy life in a wonderful environment. I was actually thinking of getting a studio," Andrew admitted. "We don't need a 2-bedroom now either. Enough of the studio, especially since I'm hardly ever home." "Okay, so we're buying a studio, and as I understand it, also somewhere in the suburbs. And what are we going to spend the money on? But we've got to keep the business going." Evelyn choked with indignation. "Here we go again, as usual. Andrew, listen to me for once in your life. A business should generate income, not swallow up all the money like a black hole without the slightest outlet. Tell me, what kind of income does your business bring in? You're still managing to break even. 0 is nothing, it's empty. You spend what you spend, you put back what you put back. And that's it. What are we living on now? The profits from your flower stalls? No, we live on what we get from renting out my apartment, and yours too. That's all our money. I mean the moves we live on." Andrew lowered his head and didn't answer anything else. Why should he? He could have objected even if he wanted to. He knew his wife was telling the truth. At such times, he wanted more than anything else in the world to think of some urgent matter and leave the house. So he did, leaving his wife to seethe with anger alone. When this long-haired brunette walked into his box 10 years ago, he knew it was over. His single life was over. And Evelyn was looking at the window, asking him something. Andrew could hardly understand what she was saying. He could not take his eyes off her eyes and her smile. And she smiled often. Her teeth were as white as sugar. "Are you listening to me? Can you hear me?" she asked. "Well, tell me, do you hear me?" "I want those roses over there," and laughed, leaving her head back. She knew that this poor guy behind the counter was smitten by her beauty and was completely clueless. The roses, he managed to concentrate on her voice. "Yes, of course, there they are." The girl waved her hand in a carefree manner. "Never mind." Andrew was even more confused. "But you don't like them, do you?" She looked at him slyly. "Yes, I do. But I like lilacs best." "You don't have any." "Accidentally. Come back in 2 days," Andrew said solemnly, pressing his hand to his chest. "And I'll get you lilacs. I'll get you a huge bouquet." That's how she looked at him doubtfully, and then threw a glance at the window. And there was cheerfulness all around. February pelted the city with snow, as if teasing the retreating ever closer spring. "I won't let you in early, I won't let you in early. But look, I'll be here in 2 days," Andrew repeated like an incantation. "I'll be waiting for you with a big bouquet of lilacs. Just come, please." He still couldn't quite remember how he had managed to get lilacs in February, and for what kind of crazy money. He couldn't remember anything at all, except those coffee eyes and her sugar smile. And it seemed that if you touched this swarthy skin with your lips, you would definitely feel the sweet taste of caramel or chocolate. Andrew darted about in search of the cherished flowers, and almost raved at every step. They dreamed of a girl who loved lilacs, and when she came, unable to say a word, he collapsed into his chair. "You're back." He exhaled. The girl slid the round, blackout, glasses to the tip of her nose. God knows what she needed them for when it was already dark outside. "You promised me lilacs," she reminded me. "And you measured my date from your own insolence," Andrew replied, and pulled a bouquet out of the refrigerator. "You see, I kept my promise. And you keep yours." She gave him her sugar smile again. "I don't remember making any promises. But if you insist, there's a cozy coffee shop 2 streets over. How much will you close? I'm hustling. I'm already in hiding. I was just waiting for you." In fact, it was still 2.5 hours before the end of the working day, as the sign on the door eloquently said. But he didn't care. He couldn't let this beautiful girl go. Not even if it started a fire. He wouldn't lift a finger. He would still go to that coffee shop. Evelyn, go into that coffee shop with that funny little flower. She had no idea that he was destined to be her husband. She just wanted to experience this funny little adventure of lilacs in the middle of winter and listen to this fool laugh and mumble something incomprehensible over a cup of cappuccino. And of course he would keep his eyes on her face and awkwardly try to take her hand. At least he'd have something to tell his girlfriends or his girlfriends. More than anything, she loved to shock the girls with stories of her adventures, which she was great at. She was lucky with everything. Until recently, indeed. She had grown up surrounded by parental adoration and had never been denied anything. By 6 p.m., Evelyn received a brand new car and her own apartment as a gift from her parents. Of course, all the expenses were paid by her dad. And when she stuttered about getting plastic surgery to enlarge her breasts, her father spent a week, but found the best surgeon for her, or went about her life with her drafty head held high, confident that the whole world belonged to her and her every wish would be granted simply because she wanted it. It went on like that until her 23rd ex. On her 20th birthday, she met James and disappeared. He was brought in by one of Evelyn's friends. In those days, she considered almost everyone she knew to be her friend. It was decided to celebrate the big birthday party in some unusual way. Evelyn chose for it the roof of the highest city skyscraper. Decor, services, waiters, and live music cost the girl's father a tidy sum, but he did not reproach his daughter with a word or a look. Moreover, the view from this roof opened up really impressive, and the whole town, as on the palm of his hand. And in the distance, the bridge over the river was interrupted by lights, and the river itself was even glowing. Beautiful or merry and accepting gifts. But the festivities were over for her. As soon as a tall brunette with clear gray eyes approached her and lightly touched her cheek with his lips. "I'm James," whispered. He whispered in her ear, "Do you want to escape from here with the two of us?" Evelyn nudged her under the elbow. "Why are you frozen?" Ouch. She did freeze. James stood like that, holding out to her a narrow long box tied with a bow. His eyes were smiling. So seductive. Evelyn unwrapped her gift like a mesmerized man and gasped in surprise. The box contained an ordinary leather cord with a bright red glass wall. How unusual. Confused, she squeezed it out. James, looking at her, continued to smile, and in his eyes, he suddenly flashed something like a sneer. There was no money for something more dignified, he shrugged. But it's not the gift itself that matters. It's the attention, isn't it? Here, let me help you put on this crude bling. It won't go with my dress. James's fingers touched her neck, and then he gently lifted her hair and adjusted that awful necklace on her chest. It's beautiful. I admired it, and it really suits you. You know, I've heard you can make a wish on one of these. I don't believe in such nonsense myself, but maybe you should. Besides, it's your birthday today. It's a very special occasion. And I clasped it tightly in my fist. Let her stay. She prayed in her mind, as if the round wall could hear her and grant her a wish. Let James stay here and ask me to run away together again. James leaned over and kissed her cheek again. Shall we run away? He asked, a little audibly. Evelyn exhaled without thinking. She'd forgotten everything. The guests, the party, and it was just night, and James's fingers touching her palm. And there was no wondering where we were going now. She laughed, finding them standing on the side of the highway. It seems so warm, and the wind carries the smell of wormwood from somewhere. That smell will get tangled in your hair, and you'll forget everything suddenly, James said seriously. The smell of wormwood. It erases people's memories, and then they have a chance to be happy. Breathe. Evelyn took a deep, full breath. She could even feel the wormwood bitterness on her tongue. He moved through her hair and looked into her eyes to the deepest depths, unabashedly and a little frighteningly. Now you know. An incomprehensible phrase escaped his lips. It was immediately picked up by the wind and swirled in the air, scattering the sounds. You can't collect it. Where are we going now? She asked, quietly. James, without looking at the road, raised his hand. A minute later, a truck stopped in front of them. Where are you going? Asked the driver, leaning out of the window. His face was very tired. They spent the next month hitchhiking in China. Evelyn did not notice the cities and the long kilometers of road. When James was chatting merrily about something with another tired driver. But she listened to his voice without listening to the words and dozed with her head on his shoulder. And that was the most pleasant moment in all those days of nights spent on the endless journey. She loved to fall asleep like this, tucked into his worn old jacket, and listen. Her father, of course, called her a few times, but the girl told him that she and her friends had spontaneously decided to go for a checkup, that everything was fine, and let her father not worry. And the hotels had microwaved food warmed up. As Evelyn stepped out of the shower, stretching on them and covering her eyes, she listened to the sheen of the water. James always took a long time to wash. She managed to fall asleep, but always woke up when he lay down next to her. Strangely, the girl couldn't remember what they'd talked about, or if they'd talked at all. We just don't need words, she thought, not for those who don't feel each other. She returned home in November, and her father could hardly keep from sighing longingly when he saw his daughter. Evelyn was slimmed down, swarthy, shot, and somehow unthinkably happy. It was as if the city had zeroed in on them both. Evelyn suddenly realized she didn't know her lover's last name or his phone number. And for some reason she was glad of that, because their crazy love was created by the full wind, the tangled ribbons, the roads, the nightlights. That's where she had to stay. She couldn't survive in the thickness of the city in a hurry among stone walls and standards of morality and a girl. It didn't hurt to think that she and James would never see each other again. Her first night in the city, Evelyn removed the lanyard her lover had given her and, clasping the beads in her fist, whispered her thanks. If Evelyn had been a little older, if she had been saving, responsible, or if she had simply been less enthusiastic about her new romance, then her story would likely have turned out very differently. But it turned out the way it did, and something had to be done. She didn't realize it until early February when the test gave her 2 stripes. "Daddy's going to kill me," she thought doomfully. And her second thought was that she didn't know where to find James, so what? For some reason, she imagined a humiliating scene in which James demanded to prove that it was his child and not someone else's. And that's all she had to look forward to. I mean, if she'd hooked him, he'd probably have tracked her down by now. Yeah, there's no reason to look for James. But then what to do? The confusion was replaced by a strange indifference to what was happening. It was that kind of detached curiosity with which she washed herself. Just in case, she took another test and laughed as she looked at the result. It was now negative. This was ridiculous. She should see a doctor, Evelyn decided. But for now, even thinking about it was agonizing. To make an appointment, show up at the clinic, and ask the doctor very definite questions. It would mean admitting that she seriously suspected that no, it was better not to even think about it. Evelyn suddenly realized that she was completely indifferent to children. DNA motherhood had never been on her mind. And what about a baby with James? She'd never once in that month what? They were inseparable without ever thinking that it would be good for them to continue to be together. She hadn't dreamed of marriage and family with him. And it wasn't because she didn't love him. It was just that she didn't associate James with quiet family happiness at all. Evelyn was well aware that people like him could only exist under certain conditions. They want the freedom and the night roads. Instantly, sensuality and recklessness erupt. Then they radiate charm and attract people like a flame of moths. But it is worth putting such a James in an ordinary, albeit very leathery apartment. Give him a job to which you have to go every day. And he will immediately turn into a bore who is dissatisfied with his salary and worries that the coffee is not hot enough. Pilots are beautiful in the dark, but in daylight, they turn into unremarkable gray men. There's a time and a place for everything. But what do we do with this strike dough anyway? Maybe, just maybe, the test was faulty. No, I'm not going to think about that now. Evelyn said firmly to herself. I'm going to freak out, just not today. Today was her high school friend's birthday, though. Evelyn had already confirmed that she was coming. That's great. She'll have a night out. And then, when she came to her senses, she would think it over again. The girl dressed quickly. Her jeans suddenly felt tight around her waist, and she ran to the car. She hadn't thought about flowers for her friend at all. And it was that very evening that she met Andrew. Evelyn was called from her office by her father when she got home. "Come in to see me for a moment, please." It was immediately obvious to her that this was going to be an unpleasant conversation. Evelyn was something her father only called her when he was angry, but she couldn't imagine exactly how she could make him angry this time. "Dad, if this is about me going over my expenses for the week, it's because..." No, it's not about that." He got up from his desk and walked around the office. The girl marveled to herself for the umpteenth time how exquisitely elegant her father looks even when he is wearing a simple robe and slippers. He looked like an English lord. Evelyn knew for a fact that her father had nothing to do with aristocrats, just a regular kid from a working-class family. "I came to see you today to clarify something." Dad started it. "Well, it's not important. I just didn't know you weren't home. I looked in the bathroom and I saw 2 used pregnancy tests." The girl had her head down. That was a stupid thing to do. "I wish I understood what was going on." With an effort, spoke the father, but inaudible muttered Evelyn. "I don't really know yet. I'm still a dad, you know. Julia came to see me, and she has doubts. So I made her get tested. Suddenly, Vanya's all excited. That's what I did. That's a neat trick. I'm glad I thought of it at all. So it's not yours? Father asked, still not believing it. These tests, they're not yours. Is you, Dad? Of course not, Evelyn said indignantly. I'm telling Julia. Oh, thank God. He sighed and relaxed all at once. He smiled, patted his daughter on the shoulder. Evelyn, if it was yours, I don't know what I'd do. I'd kill you for sure. Yeah, I bet you would, she thought, averting her gaze. First thing in the morning, I'll make a doctor's appointment. I'm going to bed. Daddy, she spoke, trying hard to play the girl, tired of something in the good night. Okay, but her appointment wasn't for another week. And that was the decisive circumstance in Evelyn's story, because between the conversation with her father and the doctor's appointment, she received a bouquet of lilacs, as she had envisioned this flower. Andrew was blushing and embarrassed, and talking some nonsense. He forgot about the coffee companions, tried to make funny jokes, and perhaps he would have succeeded if he had been less worried. And I'm pregnant, she suddenly interrupted. She's probably pregnant. I mean, I don't know for sure yet. Andrew fell silent. Evelyn herself did not know why she suddenly decided to say it. Maybe she just wanted to share it with someone. So you said he's married, I guess. Did she shake her head? No. I don't even know where the baby's father is. And I don't want to know if I've had a fight with him. No, we just broke up and he doesn't know anything. Is my dad going to kill me or kick me out of the house? That's how I'll go, I guess. Thanks for the lilacs. She started to, but Andrew caught her arm and made her sit back down. Look, he spoke confidently and quickly. It's not all bad. You can always count on me and Evelyn. You want to marry me. Now, 10 years after. Andrew grinned. He must have looked like a lovesick idiot back then. What could he do? He really was in love, head over heels in love, and he knew only one thing. If he let Evelyn go now, he'd never see her again. And that was impossible to bear. So he had to hold her, talk while she was still listening, and make sure to say something that would make her stay with him. Evelyn, I make a good living, he said. I own 3 stores. I have my own apartment. But if you want, we can buy another one. And the baby, well, we'll raise it together. Don't tell me right away. No. Okay. Think about it first. Evelyn at first listened to the flow of his words as if they were nonsense. But the more he talked, the more she realized it wasn't nonsense. No, it's a chance. It's a chance to get away with it. And more importantly, it'll solve all the problems with the father and the kid. I know someone at the registry office, Andrew continued. If you want, we'll get you married tomorrow, and you can move in with me right away. Evelyn raised her head. I want just tomorrow, as promised. Don't worry about tomorrow. The main thing is that you, according to Evelyn, hid and grinned. Here we go again, with new crazy adventures in her life. But I guess that's what she's meant to do. A lot of adventures that somehow end and end well. Andrew took her hand in his, and the girl smiled. She began to feel warm feelings for this colored student. He was trying so hard to help her, and he's doing it unselfishly, just because he's lost his head, just like she did with James. You don't know me at all. She smiled uncertainly. You're already talking about marriage. I don't know you, but I already love you, he replied without hesitation. And that's the most important thing. Recognize a person can be even a lifetime, but still do not love. And if you have fallen in love, then hold on tight. To get acquainted can then to see a woman's doctor. She got, already being a married lady. So you're saying, she mumbled. What, I'm not pregnant or something? Definitely not. Shrugged dryly by a certain elderly doctor. A little hormonal glitch. It happens. Well, groaned Evelyn. After all, she was sure it was a pregnancy after all. She got married for it. Couldn't stand the scandal her father caused when he found out she was legally married. And now it turns out it's all just a hormonal malfunction. And you shouldn't have made a fuss in the first place. She quickly jumped out of the office and raced away from the clinic. She needed to be home with her husband. Even though he was at work now anyway, it would still be home or anywhere else but here. But as she calmed down, Evelyn realized that this adventure had ended well for her as well. After all, she wasn't ready to become a mother yet. But now she had a loving husband, and that was worth a lot. And the father, though, and scolded at first, but after getting acquainted with his son-in-law, softened. He liked honest, hard-working Andrew. And when he flatly refused financial support, then the girl's father was forced to recognize the daughter with the choice of husband it did not miss. So what did Evelyn think? It worked out perfectly this time. Over the next 7 or 8 years, she repeated this to herself often. But only now did Evelyn realize that she had tied her good fortune to money. Yes, Andrew was patient and kind, and she appreciated him for those qualities. But if he was poor at the same time, she would hardly agree to become his wife. And after Evelyn's father died, she began to fear poverty. Her father had decided that his daughter was married to a wealthy man and therefore did not need an inheritance. All his fortune father bequeathed to the charitable foundation. Evelyn literally gritted his teeth with rage when she found out about it. But there was nothing she could do about it. It was because, she thought, Daddy had gotten into the idea of charity shortly before he died. He cleared charity before, just to get around taxes. But in his old age, he'd really gotten into it. Now she realized that if Andrew continued to drag his dying business, they would soon be penniless, and she would be penniless. It was only this fear that helped Evelyn realize, finally, how much money meant to her. It meant nourishment, warmth, freedom, and even security. Her husband didn't seem at all afraid of going broke. There have been worse times. That's his mantra. There have been worse times. Who can argue? So what now? That should be a comfort to her. If there's nothing to eat tomorrow, what do people who think it's important to remember that things could be worse? You'd think that'd be an argument. My husband has no more brains than a chicken. Evelyn thought angrily. His precious flower shops are more important to him than his family. After all, if the business is not profitable, it means that it's time to say goodbye. But that's what sane people realize, not people like Andrew. She'd lost a lot of weight because her anxiety was getting to her throat. Andrew, what was his strength? He tried to tempt her with her favorite foods, but Evelyn refused to eat. Each walking cup was a stone in my stomach and tortured me for the rest of the day. Sleep was a bit of a struggle, too. Evelyn woke up often and couldn't get back to sleep until dawn. Finally, her husband decided to be firm and sent Evelyn to the doctor. It was no big deal. Evelyn promised him, remembering how much his wife hated him. Going to any clinic will help you. Maybe they'll prescribe a course of sedatives that will turn me into a vegetable, she joked darkly. That way, no one would have to nag you. That would be good for you. Don't be silly. Andrew asked softly. I just don't want you to collapse and end up in hospital. The clinic is good. It was recommended to me. So you have nothing to worry about. His friendly tone somehow made Evelyn even angrier. She found herself wishing more and more often lately that her husband wasn't so calm and poised. If he yelled and swore, she would find something to say back to him. And maybe she would even feel better. But how do you respond to calm and unfailing gentleness? It's not like you're giving me a reason to break through and calm down. She thought with despair, it's only making it worse. Andrew put the clinic's business card in front of her with the address and phone numbers. Tomorrow at 4. He reminded her. If you want me to go with you, I'll make do, Evelyn muttered. There's nothing more disgusting than wet floors, Evelyn thought, standing in the clinic's spacious lobby, which was cleaned frequently. And it was the right thing to do, except she'd slipped twice already. And the heel under her left heel, she could feel it. Now it felt unsteady, as if it were ready to move away. If you make the slightest careless move, do you need to go up to the second floor? Room 211. Your registrar doctor will invite you in as soon as he is free. Evelyn looked longingly at Vida and the elevator stairs. "Is there at least one here?" she asked. The girl behind the counter professionally feigned regret over the glamorous face. "Unfortunately, it's being repaired right now." "I see," Evelyn mentally scolded, though she couldn't figure out what had made her so angry. Her own impractical predilection for high heels, the broken elevator, or the fact that she had come here in the first place. "Walk carefully," the girl advised her back. The floor had just been mopped and might be. "Oops," shrieked Evelyn with a sigh with her hands. Luckily, she managed to grab hold of the railing, the stairs, and steady herself on her feet. But the heel of the beautiful high stiletto was broken very thoroughly. "You didn't make a mistake." "No." Evelyn showed the girl the shoes with the broken heel. "Your doctor's going to have to get over a patient like that." She took off the other shoe and walked up the stairs barefoot. "Since she's here, we should try to find room 211. Otherwise, her favorite pair of shoes would have died for nothing." She looked at the broken heel again and almost cried. She bought the Dan shoes in London, and they had cost so much that Evelyn had decided not to tell her husband about the expense, just in case. Or rather, she'd quoted half the real price, and now they were going to be the end of them. She was the one who got so caught up in her not-so-fun thoughts that she didn't notice that she almost bumped into a tall, dark, bald man. "Evelyn, you really don't recognize me." She stared into his face, reddened, and the scars stretched from his temple down his cheek and was lost under the collar of his t-shirt. But the face was familiar nonetheless. She'd seen him somewhere before. "Where? Remember your birthday?" he asked. "You ran away from it, and not from us." Merry lights flashed in his blue eyes. James flew, and she, not knowing whether she was glad at this meeting or not. "It was a good time," he said, and took her hand. "You know, I often remembered it while I was in the hospital." "You're in the hospital? What happened?" "You were sick. You just had a bad motorcycle ride." Carelessly, he replied. And that's where he pointed to the scar too. It was, of course, very hard at first. I remembered everything. But you probably know how doctors themselves advise to think of something good and then get better faster. So I started thinking about all the good things I've had in my life. And you know, I thought of you the most. Evelyn listened to him at first with emotion, but then suddenly the emotion gave way to anger. It was because of him. She had it all worked out this way, not the other way around. All right, let's be fair. She was lucky most of the time. A good husband, and all that. But it could have been better, or just different. And now she was facing the man who'd changed her whole life. The man who'd left her with no options left. And he says, you see, he remembered her in her hospital bed. "I even wanted to find you." As if nothing had happened, James continued. "Nothing like that, of course. I just wanted to see you. But then I got caught up in the moment. And I'm sorry, I'm talking. You're here, aren't you? Did you go to the doctor?" "Maybe," Evelyn grumbled, taking his hand away. "I need antidepressants, I guess. Anyway, they'll tell me everything in 211. "Sure," agreed James. "Come on, I'll walk you out. What about you?" She only now noticed he was wearing a medical uniform. "You work here, or something." "I'll tell you more," he winked. "I'm the one you came to see today. You don't understand. She's been sodding ever since Dad. But he got weird towards the end of his life, and liked giving generously to all sorts of charitable causes." James chuckled. "That's not uncommon," he said. "A lot of people get sentimental in their old age, trying to atone for the sins of the past, and everyone has them. I don't give a shit about that." He just started throwing away money he made himself. "You know, if he was so anxious to get rid of it, he could have given it to me. But he was showing off in his will too. You can't do that to the dead. But I can't even find another word for this wild thing he did. He took it all. He gave every last penny to charity and left me with no inheritance. And now all I have is the apartment my parents gave me when I came of age. It's one of those things that's all mine. And even if I divorced them from Andrew. Wait, James stopped her abruptly. Why do you want to divorce him? Is he abusing you or maybe drinking? No, Evelyn waved him off. He's just stupid. Wow. And you're just finding that out now? Well, she was embarrassed. Yes, actually. He never gave me any reason to suspect him of such things before. But it's been 2 years now. Oh, James, I've lost my peace. This stupid business of his is going under. And the further it goes, the worse it gets, and he's sure he can pull it through. How long have I not talked to him? It's like he's deaf. It's been worse before. It's been worse before. As if that's any consolation. But he suggests some wild ways to cut costs, like let's sell the house, let's trade in the car for a cheaper one, or our apartment is too big. Let's sell it and buy a smaller one. And what do you say to him? James grinned. What is there to say? What do you think? Evelyn was indignant. We've already changed the car. And what would you see that bucket, James? Honestly, I'm ashamed to drive it. He rides around like he should. And where do you think he put the difference? Back into his flower shops, which I already hate. And then I have to agree to new restrictions. You're welcome. If he's the one who's in over his head, it doesn't mean I am. James took her hand again and squeezed it lightly. Still, I don't know what you're so worried about. Don't you have anything to eat if you're so sure this isn't a temporary hardship? Evelyn shook her head sadly. Her eyes suddenly filled with tears. Andrew is so sure of himself that he can't see what's happening right in front of his nose. Flower stores are closing one by one. The business has become unprofitable. Those that are surviving are going online. And of course, try to entice the buyer with new services, discount systems, but he does not want to change anything. He sits and waits for someone to come to him, for them to come to him. It's the wrong time. But the worst part is that he keeps pouring money in. It's all working out. When he finally goes bankrupt, we could be left with nothing at all. That's what worries me the most, James. She hesitated before saying the most important thing. The most important thing she hadn't even admitted to herself yet. I can understand Andrew, and I don't even know if that's good or bad, but I can understand him. This business, his brainchild, he grew it from scratch from nothing and put so much time and effort into it that, in a word, I understand why he is so caught up in these unprofitable girls and doesn't want to give them up, doesn't want to part with them. Business don't laugh. I know what I'm saying. It's always love, the truest love, as anyone who's ever been successful will tell you. Well, I understand, but you can understand me too. I'm not used to living without money. I don't know how to earn it. And frankly, I don't want to learn it either. James raised his eyebrows in surprise. That's quite a statement. Honestly, not many people are willing to admit it. No, I'm not, Evelyn repeated stubbornly. I've never done it, and I don't have the slightest inclination to do it, and I'm not willing to sacrifice my personal comfort to keep my husband in the business I love. Have you tried explaining that to him? He asked. Have you? It's no use talking to him. He can't hear me. If I had my inheritance, I'd divorce him. But there's no inheritance. All we have is an apartment that we rent out, and it is now the only thing that allows us to have something not to sink finally, and at divorce I will have to move there, and the rest of the property will be divided in half. But it'll only be half. What am I supposed to do with half the house and half the apartment we live in now? It's money. James smiled. You could invest it in something, or even start your own business. I told you, I don't know how to work, and I don't want to invest. I don't know a damn thing about it anyway. I'll just fall for some scammers, and then I'll be broke. You know, sometimes I feel like I'm wishing my husband dead. That it sounds so awful, so horrible. Go on, because if Andrew did die, everything would be so wonderfully arranged, and I'd sell his lousy shop, and I'd inherit his apartment, but the one he lived in before me. And I'd rent it and my own apartment, and I'd have a nice life. Evelyn wasn't comfortable with herself. what she was saying. It sounded awful, but she couldn't help it. True, sometimes things can be nightmarish, too. And then, on reflection, is her wish so terrible? All she wants is a quiet life. Her husband, obsessed with his flowers, doesn't consider her. He ignores her advice. He's willing to take away everything she's used to, and only so his dying business can last a couple more years. And then what? Poverty, lack of resources, labor, and your horses for pennies. Is that what you should do to your family? And what's so surprising that she's tormented by his stubbornness and wants this madness to stop? She wants her husband dead. Yeah, but who drove her to it? Didn't she? Andrew. James, the rejection merged. "You're my last patient today," he said. "I suggest we go to a bar somewhere. You look like you need a drink." "I'm barefoot," Evelyn remarked grimly. He laughed. "It's nothing. There's a shoe store across the street. It's just a quick trip to the car." And then he stood up and held out his hand to her. "Let's go." And Evelyn was suddenly transported back in time 10 years. The outline of the office disappeared. The clinic disappeared. Evelyn was standing next to her lover on the side of the road again, and the wind ruffled her loose hair, and the bitter scent of wormwood left its tang on her lips. "Wormwood," she said. "It smelled so strongly of wormwood then. I remember." He said he hadn't forgotten anything. Funny to himself. Hardware stores Evelyn had never liked to go to. But so far, she'd been spared. Now, coming back from the bar in her new James Page shoes, she was looking for some inconspicuous hardware store. James, of course, didn't quite believe what she'd told him, which wasn't a bad thing. Let him think she was a spoiled fool. That's good for her, but he's the greatest. He gave her the right idea. If only she wasn't so terribly busy with her own affairs. If only she could forget about everything and fully immerse herself in her old new love story. Evelyn froze right in the middle of the bustling street and blissfully closed her eyes, remembering the recent encounter at the bar James had brought her to. The music was loud and the place was softly lit. Evelyn looked around in surprise. She liked this kind of place, but this seemed to be the first time she'd ever been here. How did she miss such a cozy place? "You like it?" he asked. She nodded eagerly. "It's strange that I've never been here before. That bar that just opened up. Look, I'm really inspired by your drink idea, but I want to drink nice. No beer tonight, and no champagne either. It's vulgar. Do you really want a vodka?" James smiled. "Yeah, and a pickle and an appetizer." Evelyn winked at him. "No, tonight it's absinthe. And don't look at me. I know it tastes like cough syrup, but it's good. Anyway, it's what you see in the movies." She chattered on about Bohemia, laughed at her own jokes, and then pulled James out to dance to something heavy and jazzy. "I haven't felt this good in a long time," she admitted. "And you know," whispered James in her ear, "that the main thing about wormwood absinthe without the wormwood extract in the tape, it's not absinthe." "Then I can see why that's what I wanted today," she said. "I miss wormwood so much, all that craziness. 10 years ago. I want to go back in time and stay there forever." "Is that possible?" "You don't know, except with absinthe," he smiled. And for some reason his smile was as bitter as wormwood. "Evelyn, I didn't notice that they were already dancing, pressed tightly together, and she was tussling the hair at the back of James's neck, and he was kissing her slowly, leisurely. Why am I married?" she asked pitifully. "I can't even get a divorce. I would so love to be free to hitchhike again and have you by my side. I used to love falling asleep to you talking to my parents. Why is that? Why can't you turn back time? Can we?" He shrugged. "You just have to ask yourself if you really want to do it. Maybe you're looking for something else." Yes, now she knew what she was looking for. She wanted freedom. She is so tired of Andrew with his blind stubbornness, with his problems that he creates himself with his own hands. She was tired of being afraid all the time every day that she would have to live scrambling from penny to penny and trembling at the thought of the future. Freedom, freedom. I want freedom, she wrote, trying not to miss what she was looking for, an inconspicuous hardware store. And finally, she managed to find it. You will be consulted with the most serious look, addressed her by the salesman. Evelyn could barely keep from smirking contemptuously. The salesman looked to be about 40 years old, no more. And here was a young man, not disabled, sitting in this basement selling nonsense like sex rags and cheap liquid hand soap. What can I say? It's a dizzying career. And he probably doesn't make much money. What is it with men? Well, is her own husband any better? She said. We need some kind of cockroach repellent, bedbug repellent, mice repellent. So which one, exactly? He frowned. You know, there are all kinds of remedies. You should make up your mind. Or you buy one for cockroaches, decided. I want a cockroach repellent. Just please give me one that's sure to work. Here, he quickly slipped his hand under the counter and pulled out a small ball of cassis, a sachet. Take it, it's reliable, and it's quite inexpensive. Evelyn twirled the pouch in his fingers thoughtfully. A tiny, woolly, deadly one. And this is it. This remedy is safe for humans. She asked casually. You're not going to use it internally, are you? The man smiled. Evelyn felt a chill run down her spine. Is he guessing something? Or was this just a joke? Such a bad joke. That's the dumbest thing I have ever heard. How much from me with the sudden change in my voice? She asked, and without waiting for an answer, threw some bills on the counter. Here you go. Keep the change. She had to get home before Andrew did. Now that Evelyn realized that her dreams of freedom and security were not just achievable, but easily achievable, that they would come true today. Her spirits overflowed with joy. Every now and then she fiddled with the packet of cockroach poison in her pocket, and every time she touched it, she smiled. Of course she would get rid of her husband immediately after the funeral. Is that the first thing to do? Hardly. Of course, someone could use an unprofitable business, but maybe she'll still be able to sell at least at a big discount. After all, she has no choice. She can't wait for the stores to go bankrupt. No one will buy anything then. And then she would renovate the apartment. Evelyn had wanted to redecorate for a long time, but Andrew was stubborn. He wouldn't do it. Of course not. He put every penny he had into the business. So, renovation. Evelyn saw her new bedroom in shades of pink, but the curtains and carpet on the floor would be in peach. Furniture, most likely, dusty rose will be the best. But over the bed she will definitely hang was before hen. And the color was on will be more saturated Barbie house. Evelyn giggled, and immediately happy. Thought about the fact that very soon she could at least turn the whole apartment into a Barbie house and not ask anyone. Starting tonight, no one else could tell her what to do. Andrew was late for work, and it was business as usual. Evelyn only smiled and winked at his mirror reflection. Looks like we're out of luck today, she said and headed for the kitchen. She had to think of a way to slip the poison to Andrew. It didn't take long, though. The mysterious teapot stood in its usual place. Andrew never drank tea, preferring it tediously. From his wife's point of view, the procedure for brewing it was not. It was not lazy for him to fumble with this kettle of boiling water with it, then measure it out. How much tea to put? Then still wait for it all to take place, already with 1,000 details. But today this kettle will serve her well. She poured the brew into it, and then the entire contents of the poison packet. She felt light at heart. Andrew entered the bar and immediately found James with his eyes. Actually, it was hard not to recognize him. The scars were very striking. Great, he said, and the men exchanged a firm handshake. Why did you suddenly decide to pull me out about Evelyn? What did you have on her? James answered, worth knowing, Andrew, that many years ago James had an affair with his. Maybe you shouldn't. What's past is past, and there's no going back. He finally realized that today. So Andrew did the same thing to her. She needs therapy. I don't know, Andrew, But that's not what you need to worry about. Look, she barely saw me. She started complaining about you to me. Imagine, she says that your business has been failing for a long time, and you're putting more and more money into it, and you're going to bring your family into total poverty. She's very worried. Andrew, she's scared. Nonsense. Andrew brushed it off. You know, even if the flower net goes down, it's just that he took his hand away. You know, people always find some money for booze. I know, James chuckled. And Evelyn, does she know this is your bar? Would you have told her? Why would I? She'd have an ocean of new desires. Times are tough. All right. Hands up, James. It's none of my business. But I'm going to warn you about something. You figure it out for yourself. What do I do about it? Andrew made himself comfortable on the high stool and gestured to the bartender for another beer and some receipts. So what did you want to warn me about? He asked his buddy. My wife has 2 lovers and a mistress. Look, Andrew, it's your wife's condition that scares me. She might try to get rid of you. You see, I'm not talking about divorce right now. She is. Yeah, I think she's ready to try to eliminate you physically. Andrew was staring at James' scared face. Which one of us is crazy? He asked quietly. Who? James? You are, Evelyn. James stood up and clapped his buddy on the shoulder. I should have said that. I said, warned you, if anything, call me. I'm always in touch. I'll see you soon. Somehow, he had no doubt that he and Andrew would indeed see each other soon. Evelyn poured a drop of brew into the sink and scrutinized its color. It seemed fine. It was rich, bright, and most importantly, there was no unusual pungent odor either. That was fine. She opened the faucet and flushed out the brown blob. Andrew would be home soon, and then she even stretched with pleasure again, thinking about what a luxurious, pleasure-filled life she would have now. And James probably wouldn't mind having an affair with her again, and she wouldn't resist with a healthy instinct. Maybe they'll even get married someday. Though, of course, it was lazy to even think about that right now. She snapped out of her sweet reverie when she heard the key turn in the lock. Andrew walked into the kitchen and kissed his wife on the top of her head. How are you doing? Have you been to the doctor? He turned out to be such an idiot. Psychotic. I'll tell you later. Are you going to have dinner? No, Andrew smiled. I grabbed something on the way. I'll just have some tea. For Liege, of course, darling. I just brewed a fresh one. She pulled her husband's favorite cup from the shelf. Her heart fluttered with joy. It was finally here. In a few minutes, she would be a widow and rid of the idiot crook forever. Thank you, boy. I'm thirsty. Inhaling, Evelyn looked askance at her husband and smiled. Well, could she allow herself a little freedom? He wouldn't think of anything anyway. And where would he die? Die like that? She sighed and put a full cup in front of her husband. Suddenly, he asked. For some reason, he remembered James's warnings of long ago. His wife looked too excited and happy. Her cheeks were blushing. Her eyes glistened excitedly. She stared at the cup in her husband's hands without looking away. I'd rather have coffee. She lit up just before you came and drank tea. So now I don't want to look at it. Make a handkerchief. Affectionately but insistently asked his wife, Andrew. Please, for my sake. It will make me feel better. Evelyn. Offended, you mean? I don't understand. Coldly, she said. What fly bit you? According to you, I've decided to poison you. But you know, if you wanted to take out your bad mood on me so badly, you could have at least warned me. I didn't mean anything by it, Evelyn. I was just saying. But Evelyn had already left the kitchen. Andrew stared at his cup in silence. It wasn't that he took what James had told him so seriously. But God takes care of what he takes care of, doesn't he? He took Evelyn's cup, poured the coffee into it, and poured in just 1 spoonful of brew from the teapot. Then he took his wife's favorite cookies out of the cupboard, scooped them out, and set them on the tray along with the cup. Of course, he was just making up some nonsense. Evelyn was not capable of such horrors, and he would see for himself. She will drink her coffee in peace, and nothing bad will happen to her. And then he would laugh at his own foolish suspicions, he said, entering the bedroom with the tray in his hands. "But I'm sorry, my beauty. I just wanted to make a joke. I did not know that you would take and took offense." She was resentfully silent. Evelyn Andrew lowered the tray on the bedside table. "I've brought you some coffee and your favorite cookies. I didn't forget." "Evelyn, why do we have to fight? You're irritable enough as it is. It's gotten better lately. Drink your coffee and eat your cookies." Evelyn looked at her husband glumly. This story seemed to be dragging on. But what should he have just drunk his tea and left her alone? Okay, we'd have to be patient a little longer, or he wouldn't dare. "You're right, aren't you?" "Sure," she said, and took one cookie. "I've been acting up lately. I should probably take a sedative, and then I'll be fine again." "Have some coffee." Andrew handed her a cup. "It'll get cold, and cold isn't as good." "Thank you." Evelyn took a sip and instantly turned pale. "Or did you feel bad that your husband screamed?" She didn't answer. Convulsively sucked in air. Immediately, she began to vomit. Andrew rushed to the kitchen for the phone. Just at that minute, James' phone rang. Strange, Evelyn thought, listening to the quiet hissing from somewhere nearby. It used to be easier to open her eyes. Now the eyelids felt so heavy. "I can never seem to lift my eyelashes. Maybe I'm already dead." The men's voices beside him had at first blended into one incomprehensible hum, but now she began to make out some of the words little by little. "She'll come to her senses soon." She heard James' voice. "Don't worry, she'll be fine. I almost killed her." Her husband's voice sounded very close to her. "But I didn't know. It's just that she was so crazy, she was funny. And for some reason I thought of what you said." "Yeah, I didn't," you answered James. "You couldn't have known she was living there. Good thing you called me. What do you think you're going to do now?" "What can I do?" The husband was surprised. "Divorce and let her live as she wants. I still don't know what she was so afraid of, and why she couldn't just talk to me about divorce. I'd have left her anything she asked for. Did it really take that much to kill me? What if I don't want to share?" Evelyn thought, also without opening her eyes. "I want everything. And no tales from the past." Without thinking about it, advised his buddy. "Let's get out of here. Don't worry about her. It's a good hospital. They'll call you if anything happens." Evelyn heard the men walk out and closed the door behind them. It was a shame. Her wonderful plan had failed. Now all she had to do was get a divorce and go begging. But it wouldn't come to that, of course. But it wouldn't be pleasant anyway, unless she could try to negotiate with her husband to leave her at least the country house. She finally managed to force herself to open her eyes and look around. So she really is in the hospital. Yes, that's what it turns out. Rascal Andrew put that poisonous brew in her coffee about intuition. You bastard. I could have died. Suddenly, she thought with horror. My own husband almost killed me. Yes, a great family, just exemplary. Everyone's IV's halfway down. And Evelyn pulled the needle out of my arm. We don't know what's in that drip yet. Maybe it's cockroach poison too. Evelyn ran to the window and looked out. She had to get out of here. If Andrew had slipped her poison, who could guarantee he wouldn't do it again from someone who had already done it? Could anything be expected? Evelyn didn't think about the fact that, in all honesty, she was the one who wanted to poison her husband to get rid of all her problems at once. She was too primitive for that. The only emotion that filled her whole being now was a tremendous resentment against Andrew. He had mixed up all her plans, and at his mercy too. She ended up in the hospital. She may not have been very fair to him, but he had done worse anyway. After all, he was the one who had driven her to utter despair. He'd left her no choice. She tried hundreds of times to talk to him, but Andrew had remained deaf and dumb, and then he'd given her a taste of poison. And then she should have taken care of herself too. Andrew probably wasn't home yet. He'd probably taken the car. Today was delivery day for the new flowers, which meant she needed to get home. Before he did, and try to destroy the traces. There's definitely still some brew in the teapot, and she'd have to get rid of the bag that held the poison. She couldn't remember where she'd put it, whether in her pocket or in the trash. Or maybe she'd thrown it on the table by absent-mindedness. In short, she had to hurry. Why not put it somewhere on the first floor? Although, yes, the ground floor is usually the office. But what would she do now? After all, there was no way to get out the window. Evelyn threw on a robe and went downstairs to the reception desk. She was still under the floor and a little dizzy, but in general, nothing critical. She was lucky to be turned inside out right from the first sip of this. Andrew had slipped her. The older woman raised her head, looking at Evelyn questioningly. "I'm listening. Can I step outside for a few minutes?" she asked. "My husband's here, and he's brought me some things. He doesn't have time to come in because he has to work. I can go out for a while, but just take the stuff and run back in. It's pouring outside. You don't want to catch a cold the day before, do you?" I quickly promised Evelyn. The downpour was indeed impressive. It seemed that from behind the solid wall of rain you couldn't see anything half a meter ahead. But that's okay, Anna thought. Just have to move a little more carefully. Otherwise, it was fine. She could try to get a cab, but she didn't have the money to pay for it. Evelyn walked away from the hospital. Even though she knew for sure that no one was going to track her down, she looked back. Now all she had to do was run across the road and duck into the underpass. It wasn't a long walk home. She couldn't wait for a relatively free path. For some reason during the rain, no motorist ever thought of slowing down even a little. On the contrary, they even speed up on purpose. What a bunch of assholes. Finally, she thought the intersection was quiet, and she stepped onto the sidewalk. Now she'd run to the middle and wouldn't be able to get back in time. The driver's face, she had time to notice it. Distorted with fear, there was no way for him to avoid a collision without getting into another accident in the same second. Evelyn froze in place and covered her face with her hands. How strange. She'd always thought that in cases like this, you could be drowned out by the squeal of brakes, the smashing of glass, and of course, the impact of incredible force. And for some reason, everything was very quiet. Even the rain seemed to have stopped, and there was no impact either. Evelyn only felt something touch her, and her body suddenly felt so light, as if it were no heavier. Evelyn reached up and suddenly felt that the ground beneath her feet was no longer there. She laughed and took off. And it seemed that now she could go higher and higher up to the clouds, and she no longer cared at all about earthly problems.